Broadcasting from the Cass Corridor in Detroit, this is The Metro on WDET. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Today on the show, the election may be over. But
go right ahead. I was just sitting here thinking to myself, what is going on the show today? But this is what's happening on the show today. But we know there are still plenty of people feeling anxiety and uncertainty.
We'll discuss how to navigate some of those feelings.
But first, when President-elect Donald Trump took office in 2016, we started hearing the word unprecedented a lot.
That's right, Tia. Trump has obliterated all kinds of norms, and he's fundamentally changed the office of president as we know it. He's not a typical president, not least because he's a convicted felon. Trump's perceived outsider status that's fueled his popularity is among the reasons some say we're living through historic times. But is it short-sighted for us to believe this moment, politically, socially, is all that different from what's transpired in the past? Hasn't every generation lived through historic moments that have reshaped the ways we understand each other and the world? We'll try to answer some of these questions with Professor Jeremy Surrey. He's a historian and scholar of politics and democracy at University of Texas at Austin. Among his most recent books is Civil War by Other Means, America's Long and Unfinished Fight for Democracy. Professor Surrey, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me on.
So first, when we're talking about American democracy and resistance to it, you trace the roots of that resistance to more than 150 years ago in your recent book, Civil War by Other Means. Before we fast forward to this moment, I want to read the opening sentence in that book, which grabbed me pretty immediately. You wrote, "Worries about a new civil war in America are misplaced because the Civil War never fully ended." Professor Surrey, talk to me about that line.
Well, thank you. I think it's really important and relevant to the election we've just had. The end of our Civil War in 1865 is the end of battlefield conflict between different conceptions of America. But those differences remain. And the main angle of difference is whether we are a country that is inclusive of all kinds of groups of people, or whether there is one group that should be dominant. Now, who is in that one group has changed over time. People, what they perceive and define as the in-group has certainly changed. But the Union cause in the war is the cause of a multiracial, multi-ethnic, more international United States, whereas the Confederate cause is a cause for a more stratified, bounded, hierarchical country. And that's the debate we've been having ever since. And many of the regional cleavages remain the same. If you look at the election maps, not just in this election, but going back across time, you see how the party that is looking to be more closed to other groups and more protective of hierarchy generally does well in one region of the country. And in another region, the party that's more open and internationalist does well. And that's the world we're in.
And this Confederate cause we know is alive and well. You write about the insurrection and how much that was a reflection of that movement being alive and thriving. I wonder, from your perch studying democracy, how do you think another Trump presidency will help that Confederate cause to continue to thrive? And how is it going to test the limits then of American democracy?
It's I think, the most important question you've asked. Let me begin with the good news. The fact that we won't have a contested election means that we won't have what I think would have been likely violence, at least at the local level in many pockets of our country, if this election had come out differently or if it had been super duper close. The last election really wasn't close, but if it was close, we would have had probably more violence because that's part of our history. One of the points in my book is that these divisions have empowered violent actors, especially on the Confederate side. For the last 150 years, we don't talk enough about the experience of lynching and local violence and insurrections of various kinds in our society, North and South, by the way. The good news is we won't have that. The bad news is we have a president who, whether you like him or not, this is just a fact, articulates the Confederate position more clearly, more explicitly, more flagrantly, certainly than any president since World War II. And that gives a permission structure that empowers and motivates people to act on that. And that's why we've all seen in our own lives people saying things and acting in bombastic, aggressive ways that would not have been acceptable even a decade ago.
But Professor Suri, a lot of Trump supporters don't necessarily see themselves as supporters of Confederates. How do you explain that gap? What, for the people who support Trump but don't think the Confederacy was a good thing necessarily?
Yeah, I think that's most of his supporters. And I want to be clear that most of the people who support him and have supported figures like him in our history are good people, and they believe they're serving their communities and values that they care deeply about that are good values. But it is that they believe this kind of behavior is, if not appropriate, at least excusable. And they allow it to pass. And, not acting, passively accepting certain kinds of behavior is consenting to it, especially when your passive acceptance involves voting for it, funding it, encouraging it one way or another, attending rallies for it, supporting organizations that support it. So this is the point I make in my book. Most Americans are not involved in the violence and the hate, but many Americans are informally consenting to it, and that's what allows it to fester. That's why it hasn't gone away, because most people have allowed it to stay in their communities.
And when we talk about American voters, we're seeing the parties that people align themselves. We're seeing some major shifts. I wonder how you think this presidency will further reshape America's political parties as we know them.
Well, I think we've seen this happen already. We've gone back. Of course, I say that as a historian, right? We've gone back
right.
to a moment when race is really polarizing our parties more than it has since the 1960s. What we see now is that Trump's firmest support in his base are white men who have not been given the opportunity to get higher education. It's usually not their fault. They've not been given access to higher education.
Sure.
And the most certain voters for Kamala Harris are African American women. Educated African American women. So we're seeing that polarization there. What's interesting is how Latino men, particularly in my state in Texas, are being drawn to Trump. And that's, I think, because of their own exclusion from institutions that have given them access to mobility. They don't feel they have mobility in our country, and so they see him as a critic of the lack of mobility. And so the paradox here is that what Trump has done is, in speaking out about those who are left behind, and he's right, many have been left behind, he's polarizing and separating them from those who have had advantage in our society. And so we have two parties that are polarized by race and economic structure more than anything else.
So Trump's perceived outsider status is really resonating. There were a lot of Latino men and black men to a lesser degree that supported Trump. What do you make of that when considering this racial polarization?
Well, I think it's actually not surprising, because part of his appeal has been a very male-centered appeal. It's very much that men, especially those who have not had access to privilege, have not had access to universities and to high-paying jobs, they feel disrespected. They feel they're left behind as women are getting ahead, as people from other societies are moving to our country and doing well. These traditional Americans, as they think of themselves, and they are, and they're good people, they see themselves falling behind. And even though he's not really one of them, he captures their anger because he's angry at the same people they are angry at. And that, I have to say, echoes George Wallace of the 1960s and early 1970s, right? George Wallace was the governor of Alabama who appealed to Polish voters, for instance, in Chicago, by saying, aren't you upset that these African Americans are moving into your community and now doing better than you? I think a lot of men, including African American men and Latino men and white men, feel that way in their communities today.
This important historical context speaks to how cyclical things are. You're listening to The Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent with my co-host Tia Graham. We're speaking with Professor Jeremy Suri, a scholar of democracy at University of Texas at Austin. So, Professor Suri, what about when we zoom out and take a global view? We know Trump's previous time in office emboldened a lot of populist leaders across the globe. Already, Hungary's Viktor Orban said, unsurprisingly, I'd say, that Trump's election is a, quote, much needed victory for the world. How might the re-election of Trump test the limits of democracies in other places around the world?
I think a lot about this, and I've received a lot of communications from colleagues and other people in various countries. I'm sure many of your listeners have. First of all, we have to remember how much the world watches the United States. There have been more elections in this year than any year in our history in more countries, but no election gets more attention than ours around the world because we are such a big country and because we are a country that has a democratic brand. And if you're a democracy, you look to us as a model democracy, a flawed democracy. We are flawed, but you look to us as one of the great democracies in the world, one of the pioneering democracies. And so there's a lot of attention. And what has happened in this election has reinforced concerns and maybe even doubts about democracy in other countries. When we tell, for instance, the leader of India that he has to allow in his elections for more voices and less dominance of the press by a few entities that support him, Indians look and see what Elon Musk did in this election, using Twitter as basically a tool for Donald Trump. And they say, well, there's nothing wrong if we do that in our country, too. And so this undermines and depresses people who are democracy advocates, even if they're critical of the U.S. It depresses their activities for democracy in their countries. And this is a real negative consequence of this election.
I mean, a lot of people in other parts of the world do indeed see our democracy as this gleaming beacon. But when we look right here on American soil, we know Democrats put democracy on the ballot this election, but the results suggest a lot of Americans don't seem to really care about democracy. Why is that?
Well, this has long been a problem. This is not new to our moment. People say democracy, but they don't know what they mean by democracy. And people often will put other needs ahead of democracy. And that's not necessarily bad. You need to get food on the table for your children. You need to keep your home and your neighborhood secure. And people will prioritize that above other things. But our institutions are supposed to provide a democratic framework. And when you attack our institutions and when you don't follow the law, when you run a campaign where you're paying people to register to vote, as Elon Musk was, and getting away with it, when you're doing things of that sort, that is what challenges democracy. I don't blame people for prioritizing in their lives things above democracy on a day-to-day basis, but we should revere and protect the institutions that manage and guide our democracy. And that's where we're in fragile space right now because candidates and actors have attacked these institutions, and we have not acted to reinforce these institutions.
Professor Suri, we like to not only lay out the problems on this program, but also look at some of the solutions. And I realize you host a podcast called This is Democracy. And the premise is that democracy is all but guaranteed, as you have outlined today, but that the renewal of democracy is possible. Could you talk about the ways people can work to strengthen democracy?
Yes, thank you for mentioning my podcast because it is what we try to do. And I would say that I have my son on our podcast, too. He's 21 years old. He's in college. He's 20 years old in college. And we do that to have a young voice as well as having guests, from all over the world on the podcast. Renewing democracy is possible and necessary now. And I'm optimistic. I'm still optimistic we can do it. There are two ways that I think your listeners can begin to think about this or can continue to think about it. First, I think it's absolutely crucial that we all educate one another about the circumstances we're in now. And that's not about being partisan. It's to just show how difficult it is to have real democratic processes in our society where people are trying to destroy and disrupt them. And that behavior in our local community cannot be accepted. We have to reinvest in civic discourse and civic disagreement. And we can still do that in our lives. Tell our friends who are saying offensive things that that's not acceptable in conversation. They can have their opinion, but we have to be civic in our discourse. Civility is a culture we build around us, as we do in our families. So that's one thing. Be more civil, encourage civility. And then second, I think we need to educate and empower a new generation of leaders. Young people care about our future. They often don't know what needs to be done. We need to encourage them to get into the process because most of them are not partisan yet. And young people getting involved in local governance is a way to get a new generation of democracy activists into power.
Okay, so civility and educating the next generation and emphasizing their power and empowering them.
Yes.
Now, Professor Suri, Trump has threatened to end our democracy in many ways, threatening the press, saying he'll go after his enemies. Is there anything we can do at the local or the state level to protect democratic norms and institutions against some of these potential threats?
Yes, we need to support and reinforce our local institutions that protect fairness and access and education and participation for everyone. What does that mean? We need to defend our school boards against people who are sent in to tell us that books should be censored. That's undemocratic. We need to get involved. We need to go to those school board meetings and speak out. We need to defend the free press. Many parts of our country now, because of economic pressures as much as political, have lost their local newspapers. We need to invest and contribute. We need to contribute to public radio. We need to make these, even if it's $5, $10.
Thanks, Professor Suri. Yes.
Yes. We need to contribute and support these institutions. We have the power at the local level, certainly, to keep these institutions functioning, our local libraries, all sorts of things, but we have to be there. The bad guys will win, as they have in the past at certain moments, when we all just go into our cocoons and we disengage. No, we need to double down, not necessarily arguing about presidential stuff, but double down on supporting those institutions, newspapers, libraries, schools, at home, around our communities, the institutions that actually are the nurturers of democracy.
Jeremy Suri is a historian and scholar of democracy and politics at University of Texas at Austin. His latest book is Civil War by Other Means, America's Long and Unfinished Fight for Democracy. Professor Suri, thank you for joining the Metro.
My pleasure. Thank you for the excellent questions.
It's the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. You just heard from Robin Vincent. I'm Tia Graham. Now, from the world of sports, the Red Wings beat the Blackhawks last night 4-2 in Chicago. And in the NBA, the Pistons did not hold on to that winning streak. They lost to the Hornets 108-107 last night. Charlotte's Brandon Miller scored the game-winning basket just before time ran out. Still looking forward to a decent season from the Pistons.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, toes too.
Coming up, Election Day may be over, but people are still feeling some type of way. We'll get some tips on processing all those feelings. Welcome back to the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. For some, this election season left voters feeling seen and heard, while others are at a loss or maybe even grieving. No matter who you voted for, anxious feelings leading up to this election were felt from many directions. And now that the election has been called, some of those feelings are still around, even amplified. Joining us now to discuss the emotions swirling in the 2024 election is Dr. Rita Walker. Dr. Walker is a clinical psychologist and co-author of Calm in Chaos, a quick relief guide for managing anxiety and overwhelm in loud and uncertain times. Dr. Rita Walker, welcome to the Metro.
Good morning. It's great to be with you all.
Good morning. So we just had a conversation about unprecedented times in politics. We just heard that with Robin Vincent. And were people usually anxious about elections and election results? Is this something new that we're seeing, especially this heightened feeling of emotions and connection to the election?
Well, it seems that the challenges, the anxiety, the angst, all of it has increased over time. And certainly it's understandable with some of the rhetoric, some of how we communicate with one another. There's a lot that's just happening in our larger society that has trickled into how we do politics.
Yeah. And when I think about what you just said, I think about the messaging this time around in 2024 election, the onslaught of commercials and text messages and all the things and images that we saw. What does that do to someone who's going through this election and just, maybe even trying to passively follow along? What does that do to someone's emotional state?
Well, interestingly, for a lot of people, it can be hard to even recognize what the impact is of media on their just day-to-day well-being, because the social media is kind of set up to pull us in. And so before you know it, you've been doom scrolling for sometimes hours. And it has an impact, and that's the intention, because when we feel things, we're more likely to engage and to be reactive. Unfortunately, for some people, and it's not true for everyone, but for some people it does increase their anxiety. It does increase, questions about their self-worth, believe it or not. It makes our younger people, especially some of our teenagers, adolescents, makes them more vulnerable also. So it affects us in so many different ways. And I think the challenge of it all is that we don't necessarily recognize the degree to which it affects us.
Yeah, that's going to be one of my questions later on as well. But, following up with the young people, because young people right now, we've heard so much from them from different directions, whether it's their thoughts and views about what's happening in Gaza right now, or even what's going on with the messaging from the Trump campaign or even the Harris campaign. We're seeing so many uneasy feelings from the young people. So in what ways are you seeing this particular election cycle really impact the young people?
Well, there are a lot of things that's happening. Some, as you mentioned earlier, are feeling seen, but then for a lot, there's just frustration. And frustration comes about when we have expectations of how things should go. I put should in air quotes. We have expectations about how things should go, and they don't quite go that way. And for a lot of our younger folks, depending on the age, the brain isn't even fully developed to be able to manage just, the onslaught of frustration and everything that comes with it. It can be elevated anxiety. For some people, anger, because anger is seen sometimes as a more acceptable emotion, and there's difficulties taking time because we don't do this as well as we need to just kind of sit and be with our difficult emotions so that we can manage them in the most effective way.
And Dr. Walker, with young people and older people as well, but especially with young people, is this anxiety unique to the social media age that we're seeing, this connection as well?
Well, the research would suggest that there is a correlation, and that we know that folks who consume more social media seem to have more anxiety and more depression. Can we say that it causes it? Not necessarily, but there seems to be a suspicious co-occurrence of youth who are spending more time in social media who seem to be struggling more emotionally. And as a society, because you did mention older folks, yes, as a society, the American Psychological Association, assesses stress in America, and it has been increasing incrementally each and every year. And the degree to which people feel like they can manage it is decreasing. So it's one thing to have stress, and it's another thing to feel like we don't have what we need to be able to deal with it and manage it effectively.
And, going back to talking about, the things that we think should have, air quotes, should have happened, and the feelings out of the disappointment of what we thought should have happened, what advice do you give people in accepting defeat or accepting that idea that something didn't go as planned?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because it is important for us to take time. And I think we realize with most things, when we're upset or disappointed, when there's been some loss, some really important loss, that the sting of it all recedes with time. For some folks, in that time, it's helpful to distract ourselves, so that we don't kind of feel the emotions as strongly, but do something productive. I was talking to a friend earlier today who said that she had a to-do list of things she'd been putting off that she was working on. And then for other people, sometimes it really is just kind of sitting and reflecting by writing. Not everyone likes to write, but I encourage folks to experiment with writing. What has been the most difficult thing about this current situation that I experience? Because it is different for everyone, and we can't assume that everyone has the same reality.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Dr. Walker, taking a deeper look here, the city of Detroit, of course, is a majority Black city. And, what do you tell Black voters about coping while voting in a system that may not represent their values or ideas, or the folks who represent that system don't look like them?
Well, first, again, take some time. Take some time to reflect, because emotions are understandably strong, and they are understandable. I mean, I know that there are folks who would say like, oh, well, you're overreacting or overthinking, or you're too sensitive. Oh, my goodness, that's one of those strong ones. You're too sensitive. That whatever is being experienced is valid, is understandable, is legitimate. And taking time to connect maybe even more deeply with the community. Because I think sometimes, there's this hope that, larger, greater, different communities will become more accepting and more validating. And where it's important to start, at least from the psychology of being Black and African-American people, is connecting with a more affirming community that is oftentimes the community that looks like you. Yeah. And that's an important and helpful place to start.
Mm. You're listening to The Metro on WDET Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham with Robin Vincent. We're chatting with Dr. Rita Walker of Wayne State University about the emotional and mental impact of elections in our political system. So, just piggybacking off of that last question and answer, how does this manifest in public health when we talk about voters accepting and coping and possibly grieving? How does these manifest in public health? How do these feelings about election and the political system impacts a person's mental health?
Yeah, one of the things that I like to be able to tell folks is to recognize, when our emotional health challenges bubble over, they start to affect other areas of our lives. They start to affect how productive we are at work, creativity, relationships. Folks start snapping at family members and having less patience with coworkers. And that's where we want to be most mindful, because I mentioned earlier, sometimes we don't recognize how much what we're dealing with is affecting us. But when we start to notice even small and subtle shifts in how we're behaving, and we can say, you know what, that's not me. That's not me, and that's not even who I want to be. So I might need to take a step back. I might need to order dinner rather than cooking tonight, if it's possible. I might need to make a phone call to someone who I know cares about me that I can at least vent to for 10 minutes. But be sure to ask, because not everyone can handle the load when we're venting. So recognizing how we may have shifted in the last few days, for some folks, they may not even feel the impact today or next week, but maybe over the holidays, they feel even more sadness or sense of loss about recent events. So just being aware of how they're doing so they can be honest about honoring where they are, to be able to cope in the way that's most helpful for that person.
And, I want to go into the heightened, anxiety that could lead into the future, and what it could lead to as we continue to go on, especially as we go through the next few years. What are some of the things that we can do, especially going forward, to help us out, especially with emotional and distress and anxiety?
Well, being aware of the thinking about fear. Fear is healthy and adaptive as long as it motivates us to be productive and to problem solve in ways that are most effective. Now, when fear becomes paralyzing, and that happens for some folks, they withdraw from friends, they withdraw from things they typically used to do, that becomes problematic. And for me, as a clinical psychologist who connects, just thinking and behavior, I understand, how difficult it can be. And the first step is to say, what is upsetting me most about this? what is it that I am telling myself about what this outcome means for my life? Because sometimes we fill in things, and that's where anxiety can come in. We fill in the worst, most awful outcome. Well, check ourselves and say, okay, what is the likelihood of this? And if this is likely, then what do I actually do about it so as not to become paralyzed by fear and anxiety?
Dr. Walker, I'm sitting here thinking about conversations we've had in the newsroom, honestly, and some of the things that we've been talking about, not just in the newsroom, but at home with our families and friends and different things about what's going on in our country and some of our feelings that we've been unpacking these last few days. And that is one of the best tips and little nuggets that I've gotten so far about how to proceed going forward. So, if you have any other tips or any other things that people can do to help them improve their mental health right now and beyond, please let us know.
Yes, I do believe in small steps. And I say that because sometimes we come up with these Herculean, I'm going to take a big trip or leave the country. And we may not even have the bandwidth. Most people don't have the bandwidth or the resources or the capacity to pull off such a thing. But it's okay to start small. As I mentioned earlier, start with writing about what is it that's frustrating me the most. Small steps. I tell folks all the time, when you're in the shower, whether you take it in the morning or at night, when you're in the shower, rather than reworking in your mind everything that's upsetting you, just be in the water. Give yourself some time to feel the warmth and be present, because our physical bodies react to our anxiety and our stress, and we need to find ways to reset. Go outside, take a walk, do something nice for someone that is just sending a text saying, I was thinking about you, you were on my mind. I know it's a lot going on in the world, but you're not alone. And reaching out to other folks in small ways and doing small things for ourselves until we can build back up to a place where we can work together, come together as community, come up with bigger plans, because we can't do anything if we sidestep getting our minds into the best focused place.
Dr. Rita Walker is a clinical psychologist and co-author of Calm and Chaos, a quick relief guide for managing anxiety and overwhelm in loud and uncertain times. Thank you so much for joining us on the Metro this morning. We look forward to chatting with you again.
Well, thank you for the conversation.
From the WDET newsroom, voters in Detroit re-elected Sherry Gay Dagnogo to the city's school board. She was the top vote getter among 21 candidates. Monique Bryant and Ida Carroll Short won the other two available seats. That means Detroit's school board remains composed of all Black women, except for Superintendent Nikolai Vitti.
The Michigan Department of Health and Human Services is urging parents and guardians to update vaccines for babies and young children. Pertussis, or whooping cough, cases are increasing across the state. Case numbers have surpassed last year's reports. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommends pertussis vaccines for infants, children, adolescents, and people who are pregnant.
Coming up, among auto workers, there's been some political division this election season. We'll get reactions to Trump's election from the leader of the Auto Workers for Trump group.
This will truly be the golden age of America. That's what we have to have. This is a magnificent victory for the American people that will allow us to make America great again.
Welcome back to the Metro on WDET-FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. That was President-elect Donald Trump's victory speech, which he gave in Florida yesterday.
Trump clearly won the election, both the electoral college and likely the popular vote. He had a lot of support from a broad swath of Americans, and one area of support he got came from union members, which was notable.
Generally, when the leadership of an organization supports a candidate, the organization is on board with that candidate.
The Metro's Sam Corey says that was only kind of the case when it came to the United Auto Workers. He joined us on this side of the show to explain.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Tia and Robin. This is it's good to be here. So essentially, a poll conducted by the union in October found that UAW members favored Kamala Harris by 22 points over Trump. And that's significant, but it was only a bit of the majority of members that supported Harris. Brian Pannebecker is a retired auto worker. He lives in Macomb County, which went for Trump, and he was with the UAW for 25 years. He left the UAW when right-to-work laws came about in Michigan, and in 2017, he organized the Facebook group Auto Workers for Trump, which amassed thousands of followers, including auto workers and auto suppliers. He also spoke at several of Trump's rallies in Michigan leading up to the election. I sat down to speak with Brian about why auto workers like Donald Trump support him, what issues they think he'll solve, and the differences that exist between the union members that were for Trump and those that were for Harris. You founded the Auto Workers for Trump in 2017.
Correct.
I am curious what your theory for organizing was or what your tactics were. Clearly, they paid off.
When I do something, I usually go all in. So I said, well, I'm going to start a group where we can all communicate with each other on Facebook. So I put 30 guys into a Facebook group called Auto Workers for Trump. They were all from my plant. They were all active Ford employees and represented by the UAW. And as more people found out about it in my plant, they started requesting to join on Facebook. And I started adding them in, and it slowly started to grow, and word started to spread. And pretty soon, other Ford workers at other plants, like the Van Dyke Transmission plant, our sister plant, and other plants, started to see it on Facebook, and they started asking. So our membership started to climb. I was the only administrator, and I was adding people in every day. It seemed like we got up to 300 or 400 people, and then before I knew it, word spread to other auto plants, Chrysler and General Motors plants.
What were they so taken by? Why did they so quickly lend their support behind Trump?
Well, Donald Trump appeals to the average working man and woman. I mean, that's who he speaks to. And I know a lot of people find that, sort of, hard to
unusual
believe.
considering he's a very rich person.
He's a billionaire. Yeah, sure. But he speaks to us, and he represents us, and seems to take a real interest in our well-being and our jobs and our industry. And he, hey, let's face it, he was a builder in New York, and he built a big chunk of that New York skyline. And he's a deal maker, and he'd started a lot of businesses, some successful, most of them successful.
Auto workers felt like he liked them. Mm-hmm. They felt like that he appreciated them.
Yeah. So there was a lot of support for him at the auto, on the shop floor, the blue-collar guys.
I want to talk a little bit about UAW leadership and maybe some split in the UAW. President Shawn Fain of the UAW supported the Harris campaign. He also has made it pretty clear he doesn't like Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. I think the feeling is mutual there, Sam.
I think you're right. I think there is definitely tension there. I am curious, it's certainly true that a lot of UAW and union workers support Trump across this country. It's also true that a number of UAW workers supported the Harris campaign. I'm wondering what you make of them. I'm wondering why you think there's that split and why you think they did support Harris.
This is true of young people who hire into one of the domestic auto companies. They feel a sense of security when they're represented by the UAW. And they're probably, like a lot of auto workers are, second, third, maybe even fourth generation auto worker. Their dad may have worked there, their uncle, their grandfather, their great-grandfather even, back into the 20s and 30s, or, the 30s when the UAW was formed at least. So there's sort of a sense of loyalty there. But around the time of 1980, I would say, at the Reagan Revolution, people started realizing what Ross Perot said when he ran in 1992. The unions and the Democrats had been allowing our jobs to leave the country for a long time. And if NAFTA was passed, Ross Perot said, you'll hear a giant sucking sound, and that'll be all of our jobs leaving the country.
The government could just ensure that auto workers and people without a college degree continue to get paid high wages if they're in the service industry, for example. Do you stand for that? Do you think that's a good idea?
No, I don't. Not at all. I'm a free market kind of a guy, and I think employers, if you want to encourage job creation and businesses to start up, you can't dictate to the entrepreneurs and the people who are willing to take a risk on starting a small business. You can't dictate to them what they have to pay their employees any more than you should be dictating to the domestic automakers what type of vehicles they should be building. So I think we need to just keep government out of that. Let the market forces determine, which type of career fields pay better.
The North American Free Trade Agreement, of course, is following a lot of the free market principles that you're talking about, right? Jobs are cheaper abroad, and so corporations moved abroad and also to the American South, by the way, where there weren't unionized jobs.
Sure.
So they could pay people less money.
Sure.
They're like, great deal for us.
Yeah.
Bad, worse deal for the worker. So I guess, how do you align these two things? NAFTA followed free market principles, and like you said, it worked really poorly for American workers. What do you make of that dynamic?
So you're exactly right, and that you can't blame those business owners for wanting to reduce their labor costs. Businesses start up and go into business for one reason, basically. They're not charities. They go into business to make a profit. And if they're corporations, they have investors. Their board members and investors, shareholders, demand that they're profitable, and that's what they're in business to do. So you can't blame them for doing that. But what Donald Trump is saying is our standard of living and our, the pay scale here in the United States is much higher than countries like Mexico or El Salvador, Guatemala, Central American, South American countries. So you can't tilt that table so high and allow those jobs to leave. We want market forces to work here within our borders, but we cannot allow our manufacturing base to leave because these manufacturing companies decide to relocate in foreign countries and take all our manufacturing base. So his solution is, and he says this is his favorite word now, is tariffs.
That was Brian Pannebecker, a retired auto worker and a Donald Trump supporter. He was speaking with the Metro's Sam Corey. From the WDET newsroom, turnout was lower in Metro Detroit in terms of the percentage of registered voters who cast ballots in this year's presidential election compared to 2020.
The Canadian Pacific Holiday Train will begin its tour this November 21st and move through parts of the U.S. and Canada. Unfortunately, Michigan doesn't have a stop on this year's tour, but the train will pass through Detroit, Plymouth, Westland, and Milan, to name a few. The Canadian Pacific Holiday Train passes through on November 25th.
Coming up, we take a beat to discuss an annual tradition that marks the beginning of the holiday season in Detroit. Welcome back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Downtown Detroit will soon have a 66-foot tree adorned with Christmas lights in Campus Martius. The city will light up on November 23rd, and guests can expect live performances, family activities, and a few things that will be a little different this year. Joining us live to chat about this year's tree lighting and festivities, we have Laura Dean. Laura is the Director of Parks and Public Spaces for the Downtown Detroit Partnership. Laura, thank you for joining us on the Metro.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good.
We are so excited to be on with you today.
Yes, I'm excited as well. Love the tree lighting. Is one of my favorite things about Detroit and downtown Detroit. So give us a little overview of this year's tree lighting. The tree has arrived. What's next? I'm always just perplexed how you all put it together, put the lights on. Like, it has to be a whole rehearsal.
It is done by professionals, these men who come out and decorate it. We have a crew of 10 that come from New York, and literally that's their job. They decorate Christmas trees around the country for different celebrations. It'll take 10 guys 2 weeks to put 100 or 25,000 LED lights on our tree and to get the ornaments up there and our 7-foot star in time for us to light it up with the rest of Detroit on November 22nd, for the tree lighting event, our 21st tree lighting.
Yes, and that's perfect that you say that because it's the 21st year. So can you talk just a little bit about how much it's grown in those last 2 decades?
Oh, yeah, it has really taken off. Last year we clocked over 100,000 people downtown throughout the event. So, it is a must-do tradition for many Detroiters and visitors. It's definitely a family-friendly atmosphere. It's totally free for people to come. We have food trucks, we have bars, we have swag giveaways with different sponsors. And then, the Cadillac markets are open and the Cadillac Lodge. It's a really great event to come out. It's from 4 to 9 p.m. And there's a live broadcast portion, too, with WXYZ.
Yes, look forward to that as well. And what can people expect from performers this year? I know that there's Dornada Davis, one of the featured performers. She's a regular at WDET. So what can people expect?
Yeah, so we have a spectacular lineup of artists that will showcase on the MGM Grand stage and on our ice skating rink. So some of our stage lineup, will feature, Detroit locals like Dornada Davis and the Next Generation Funk Brothers. We'll also have 2 kind of more national acts. One is Alex Sampson. He has a great voice. He was actually featured on America's Got Talent, and he has his own Christmas song that he'll be singing. And then we have a Grammy-nominated blues band from Memphis called Southern Avenue, and they are so much fun. We are so excited to have them on the stage with everyone else. And then obviously, crowd favorites, fan favorites like Santa and maybe the Grinch will show up throughout the evening. And our ice skating rink, will feature Alaj Balde, who is a phenomenal skater. He is viral for his hip-hop infused talent shows, and, he does really great stunts on the ice as well.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and he is like a champion for getting skaters to sign up, and he's just a great person. So we're excited to have him here, and we feature 2 local skaters that have just recently joined the U.S. Skating team, which is Lindsay Fitzpatrick and Keaton Behringer. So they'll be doing like a pair skating on the ice. So we're so excited to welcome them. And then all of the Metro Detroit skate clubs, that have been with us for years, like Arctic Figure Skating Club and New Edge, and just so many great figure skaters and local talent that we can showcase Detroiters at.
I was lucky enough to be a participant in the tree lighting last year, and the production of it all is just absolutely fantastic. It's literally like it's an oiled machine. You're in and out there. It's really, really working and moving. If you're listening to the Metro on WDET FM, I'm Tia Graham with Robin Vincent. We're chatting with Laura Dean with the Downtown Detroit Partnership about this year's tree lighting. And Laura, before I let you go, what are some important things that people should know about this year's event, whether it's parking or shuttles or anything like that? Any advice for folks headed down to the tree lighting this year?
Yeah, my advice is, remember the date. It's November 22nd. Yes. It starts, the festival starts at 4 p.m., goes to 9 p.m. The rink and ice skating opens the next day, the 23rd and 24th. We have great events planned for that. But if you need to find any information, you can visit our website at downtowndetroit.org. I suggest for everyone to arrive early. We have parking suggestions on our website. You can book that stuff early. Plan to be outside. It's a totally free event. We do have some like safety stuff on our website too, of like a bag policy and things like that. If you're familiar with it, if you're going to a sporting event or any other type of concert. So all that's on the website, but we have food and beverages and live entertainment. And we're just really here to usher in the holiday season in downtown Detroit with, a few 100,000 of our closest friends.
Yes, Laura Dean is the Director of Parks and Public Spaces for the Downtown Detroit Partnership. The Downtown Detroit tree lighting is November 22nd from 4 to 9 p.m. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you so much. Okay, bye.
That's the Metro for Thursday, November 7th. The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt. Additional support from Dorothy Jones. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Music by Sam Bobian and Will Sessions.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Thanks for listening.
We'll see you tomorrow.